This podcast acknowledges the traditional owners and custodians of the lands and waters throughout Australia where we record this podcast. We pay our respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and the Ngunnawal people and Wiradjuri people of the Kulin Nation and their elders past and present. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Day One, the Maddocks podcast talking all things clerkship and commercial law related. You're joined by Maddocks lawyers Sophie, Edgar and Sam Ejtemai, and we have another exciting episode today.
We absolutely do, Soph. We're going to be talking all things networking as a junior, whether it's uni events or clerkship-related cocktail nights.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about some tips and tricks and some of the things we thought we did well and some of the things that we
didn't
do well. We've also then gotten recording with Kate Oliver and James Smart.
We do.
Which is a really great interview for those that are interested in applying for Maddocks. They, in their respective teams, are well regarded as some of the best practice areas in the country for government advisory. And it's such a popular team. It's such a good one for Maddocks.
Yeah, it's a really cool area, and both of their teams, like I work at Maddocks, and yet I was listening to their responses to our questions, and I was like, this is so exciting, and it's really cool. They do really cool work. So I think if you are someone who maybe didn't think that you would go down that government path, like, just listen to the episode because it's pretty good.
Yeah, it's really good. Like, government work has a perception about it, but then you hear about some of the work that they do, like with corporate clients.
Completely,
my
God,
it's
cool. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's no wonder it's so popular.
I know, right? Anyway, it's a point of difference for Maddocks, but we won't spoil it too much. So stick around and listen to that. But before we dive into the interview with Kate and James, we are talking networking.
Yeah, networking. It can be like a daunting and a trippy part of the process, I think.
It is it's
anxiety
challenging.
I think there's a lot of anxiety around networking and, particularly in the hybrid world now where there's a mixture of like online networking events
true.
and the in-person. And I think I know at Maddocks, definitely the in-person is coming back, and almost all our networking nights are in person now.
Yeah, which is great.
Definitely prefer the in-person ones.
In-person's great.
Yeah. Let's just dive into some tips and tricks around networking night. When we're talking about networking nights, we are talking a mixture of events, student-related uni events, meet the professionals, information sessions, commercial careers nights.
Yeah, all those types of ones where they're sort of run through the uni that you might go and get some insight into the commercial law firms.
Yeah.
Anything like that.
And I'd say the other group of them that you'll come across through this process a lot is information nights and networking cocktail nights at the actual law firm itself.
Yeah, firm specific.
And each firm will do it differently, and they might have them at different stages. Some do them very early in the process. Some do them, halfway through. Some sprinkle in a couple of different networking nights through the process. So when we're talking networking, we could be talking any one of those things. I think our tips and tricks go across them.
Yeah, across all of them. Yeah. And beyond that, I mean, we're still doing it. I think that it's something that once you're in any career, really, it's something that you're always going to be doing. So these are sort of some good foundational tools that might calm your nerves a little bit when you're getting ready to attend these evenings.
I think I was going to say, this probably leads into my first tips and tricks.
Just jump straight into it.
I think the most important thing is when you're going into this is, whilst we're going to give you what worked for us, tip number one is, and always remember that you have to be yourself at these events. Yeah. Which I know it's such a generic piece of advice.
It's one of those things where it's like anytime you want someone to tell you like a really helpful piece of advice, the advice will be to be yourself. And it's not one of those things that you can look at the time and be like, oh, that's helpful. But in hindsight, exactly right. I would give that advice to someone now as well. But it's annoying because it's like, oh, great, be myself. That doesn't help me.
I think if you're trying, and when I say this, is you don't want to tailor your personality and the way that you present yourself in the way that you think the firm wants you to present.
Yeah, I agree.
Because I think that is disingenuous, but also you end up overthinking it and tripping yourself up. And I think that's where blunders happen. And you make these comments, you go, why did I say that? I didn't want to say that.
You definitely have to stay true to yourself. And I think that's how you come out of this process in the right place and at the right firm, is because the process sorts it out for you in some ways where you will end up where you're supposed to end up. And 9 times out of 10, that's because your interests and your values align. And you can't work that out if you're not true to yourself throughout the process.
100%. And everyone's got their own experiences that led them to where they are.
Yeah.
And it's just about expressing that, having conversations. Exactly. Everyone's got different personality type. you know, you'll click with some people, you won't click as much with other people, but you won't know that, and like, unless you are yourself.
You know, when I was going through the process, it's much more finding out the questions like, I liked a particular subject at uni and I know that you practice in that area. Can you tell me a little bit about what your day to day looks like? I think it's really cool and it's really interesting to find out from a specific person what their day looks like.
Yeah, you can only learn so much from a website. And like, we just interviewed Kate and James and we work at the same firm, and we're learning about what the day-to-day they do. And so I think it's not a bad question at all. That's probably tip number 2, is like what you were saying, and what's the mindset going into a networking night. And I think your main tip and like what you just said is like, what are you trying to get out of this networking night?
Yeah, I think you can get stuck sometimes in the trap of being like, I need to impress and I need to, you know, put my best foot forward. And then that's kind of a tricky place to be because you end up sort of bringing yourself undone. And I think that you will naturally sort of come across a lot better in these sort of networking spaces if you can flip it and instead say, go into the evening, the information session, the cocktail evening, whatever it is, go into the evening and think like, what do I want to get out of this? Do I want to learn about the firm? Do I want to go and speak to a specific person that practices in employment law? Do I want to talk to a junior to find out about a more realistic day in the life of what a junior or how the graduate process works? Sort of think about what you want to find out. If it's, will I fit into the culture? How does the culture work at that firm?
Yeah.
If you can like go into that, I think that you will ask questions that you're generally interested in. You'll stay true to yourself in doing so, and people receive that well. I know, like, coming on the other end of it now, I really like to see that.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that's coming prepared is so important. But like you said, you're not coming prepared with a list of a million questions about the nuance of like statutory interpretation.
No.
The whole point of these processes is that you get an understanding of the firm and the firm gets an understanding of you.
Yeah.
And if you're not yourself and you're not prepared with what you're trying to get out of it, then I think there's a disconnect there.
Oh, completely.
The conversations, I think for the uni event specifically, that's the most important thing because, you know, you're there to find out about the firms. What are you trying to find out? What information do you want to get out? And if you get an opportunity to ask a question, I know some of the events are a bit tricky when there's, you know, 100 students and not everyone's going to ask a question.
Yeah.
But, you know, come prepared with what you want to go. And maybe someone will ask that question before you, and that's totally fine. You've got your information.
Exactly.
You don't need to ask a question just for the sake of asking a question.
No, you don't.
But if you're going to a cocktail night, for example, and there's a room of 15 partners and 20 juniors, you know, if you've got a particular interest in an area, that's great. You can go and try and navigate a conversation with the junior or the partner in that area. Or if you're just trying to find out about life as a junior at Maddocks, or if you're trying to get certain information out of it, I think lead with that. And then just let the conversation go where the conversation goes. When I went to my networking night at Maddocks, I got on really well with one of the property development partners, and we were talking about work and property, and that was an area that I was really interested in, and we were having good chats. And it was myself, a partner, and another junior at the firm. And then they started talking about what was happening on their weekends, and they were talking about Hamilton, and I happened to be going to see the show. And so the conversation, it would have been so unnatural for me not to chime in with, hey, I also like Hamilton, and let's
pivot it back.
Pivot it back and be like, so talk to me about the new, you know, landlord regulations that just came in. So like, go with the flow of the conversation, come prepared with what you want to get out of it, but be open and willing to divert.
Yeah, it's such a good point that you make, because it's just general social awareness that comes into this. And like, at the end of the day, the partners that work here and all of the lawyers that work underneath them, they're all just people. And it's navigating that balance. You know, there's so many different types of people that you'll come across and that you've already come across. And it's no different when you go into a networking night. Some people are naturally going to be more drawn to, you know, chatting about other things, and they might want to talk about their personal lives, and others won't. So it's just sort of going through that process and sort of feeling which way the conversation's going. Like, I wouldn't go up to a partner straight off the bat and say, hey,
what did you get up to on the weekend?
Maybe I would, but I don't know.
I think I always go for a slightly more cautious approach of like, you're there for a work function.
Exactly.
You're there to talk, and you're there to ask questions.
And they're there to answer your questions. That's why they're there. Like, they actually want to tell you about what they do on a day. Like, people love talking about themselves and their own achievements.
Yeah.
Like,
partners love talking about their practice and their journeys, and as they should. They've been very successful in their career to get to where they are, and it's a wealth of knowledge. And I think those nights are incredible opportunities to get access to that information and to help guide your decision making.
It gives you such a good insight.
Totally. But like you said, social awareness. Some partners are a lot more casual, and some partners, you know, they want to talk about work, and they will, but they will pivot the conversation themselves to more general topics, like what do you do outside of work, like what are your and I think I was always of the thing of let them drive the conversation there. And if they want to keep it strictly on ask me questions about Maddocks and work, you keep it strictly on that. And if they want to pivot, then you follow along with them. So tip 1 and 2 kind of blended in together there, but be yourself in your presentation and in your questions, but also in paired with what you want to get out of it and being yourself. So
what are some like general questions, I suppose, that you could pop in your tool belt that you could just, what would you think is a good question that you could bring out on the night?
This is going to be such a lawyer answer. It depends on the person. Like you said, what do you want to get out of it? Something I really wanted to get out of it was I was drawn to certain practice areas. That was something I wanted to get more information about the practice areas. I like to know what the day-to-day look like as a junior lawyer and like what expectations are of junior lawyers. Like what kind of focus does the firm put on learning and development? That was something that was really important to me. Am I, as a clerk, as a grad, as a first year, what does learning and development look like? And that question doesn't have to be geared towards partners. I had really good, candid conversations with junior lawyers at the firm that talked about their experience in their rotations and what they learned from it and how they developed as lawyers. And that, as a benchmark, I was able to compare those answers to other firms' answers. And that's such an easy question to ask a junior lawyer, like, hey, what are your learning development opportunities? Because everyone has them and everyone will give their answer and everyone sort of tackles a bit differently. Like, I think that's a really easy, safe question.
I was very focused on the learning and development opportunities and how I was going to, be supported through finding an area that I wanted to practice in. But I was also equally interested in a question that I would gear more towards the partners was, like I mentioned before, what does your practice area actually look like? What's your day in the life? What are you working on currently that's like keeping you really interested and engaged? And then from there, I could pivot the conversation. Like you're going to have follow-up questions because they're going to, tell you all about this stuff. And don't be afraid to ask them what they're currently working on, because a lot of them, they might not be able to tell you. And if that's the case, they won't. But they're not going to make a big song and dance about it. They'll move on to something they can tell you about.
I think like a really hot tip for those that are interested, like as a construction lawyer, I think right now it's such an interesting time in the construction space. Lots of builders, like Porter Davis going under, ripples through the market, supply chain issues. And it's a very, very fascinating time in the construction industry on how contracts being negotiated, the disputes that are happening. And if you are a networking night and you're talking to whoever you're in that space, and you can ask them questions like, I know Porter Davis went under. How has that affected the whole construction industry? If you're interested in that space. If you're not interested in that space, don't ask a question, then get stuck. But if you are interested,
then ask it.
And they will love it. And they would talk for 20 minutes just to fill the space.
Exactly.
And so like you said, if you're interested in an area, if you're talking to a partner, what does your day-to-day look like? What are you working on at the moment? What are some of the issues in your industry that's affecting your workload or your
some of the challenge? What are some of the challenges that your clients are currently facing because of, whatever economic market that it might be relevant to.
Totally. If you don't want to answer those questions, also okay, because I did not ask any of those questions. I was much more surface level questions, and that's totally fine.
It was very much like I think you only need to ask a few. Like I sort of led with the day of the life question quite a lot, and then that brings up so many other things that you can talk about, and it's just a natural conversation. And so don't be too intimidated by it, because if you've got just a few little questions that you can bring out, bank them. And if you get really stuck or you're finding it tricky to sort of navigate the conversation, you can always bring them out.
Yeah, totally.
You don't need to write them on your hand, though.
No, please don't write them on your hand. I think that gets us to our third and final point. If you know someone going, come with a friend.
Come with a friend.
If you're nervous, come with a friend.
It's just like that nice icebreaker when walking into the firm. It's like, what level am I going to? Where do I go? Like, how do I, it can be really nerve-wracking and scary to do that. And it doesn't need to be, but naturally it probably will be. And so if you can have a friend with you, I think that puts your nerves at ease quite a lot.
I think come with a friend. You don't feel like you need to stick with them the entire time. Walk in together, get comfortable with the space. You might need 5 minutes to assess the scene before you start to go, where am I going to go? I think the next general tip is around like food and beverage, the cocktail nights.
What to expect?
Yeah.
What do they look like?
So the Maddocks cocktail nights are catered, the ones in and around the clerkship process. They generally will serve food. They'll have a range of alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages. I personally really enjoyed holding a drink.
Same.
Whether it was water, whether it was alcohol, whatever it is. I liked having a drink.
Like in your hand.
Yeah, because I didn't know what to do with my hands. Otherwise, it's like, I don't want to put them in my pocket. I didn't want to so I wanted to hold something. I thought that was really good. And then it also just like, if there was dead space, I could just take a sip of my water or my drink or whatever it was. It's there. I think in terms of the alcohol, parts of it. I always just say proceed with caution with
Agreed.
alcohol. If you don't drink alcohol or don't want to drink alcohol, perfect, right?
Yeah.
I opted for water a lot.
Same.
Just because if I'm nervous and I have a little bit of alcohol, I think that was not going to help me in that situation.
Yeah.
But I think that's my general tip with food and beverage, just mindful of your consumption levels. In terms of like other general tips, in terms of like dress code, ask what it is for that particular event. If it's a cocktail night, just wear business attire. I think it's the safest.
I think in all of them, I wore a blazer, just a basic top underneath and pants. I was very
wear what makes you comfortable, but it's appropriate for the situation.
The other thing I wanted to add was, and we kind of touched on it before, I was definitely in the trap of, I had to ask groundbreaking questions.
Yeah.
And like, you're going to talk to such intellectual and really smart people that you should bring questions that are deserving of their time and are deserving of, their intellect.
Yeah.
And I think that there's obviously space for that. And I think that coming through the process, I was way too focused on it. And now on reflection, I don't think that there's anything wrong with asking just those, surface level questions that help you get to know it, because you can ask these really groundbreaking questions. That's great. But what are you getting out of that? Because if you don't have a general interest in it, then it's kind of just a bit redundant.
I agree.
So that's why I like those. I like those questions. Coming out of networking nights now and talking to other people, they're the questions that we like to hear.
So those networking nights are to get as much information as you can about the firm so you can write a very well-crafted application. You're gathering information as much as you can. You have opportunities to have interviews. You don't think that the whole process hangs on you asking this groundbreaking question.
Yeah.
It's not.
Go and ask, different partners. Even if you walk into the night thinking, I want to learn about 3 areas, then go and ask 3 separate partners those questions. And you can ask the same question.
Yeah.
And if you walk away being like, oh, wow, employment law sounds awesome, or M&A sounds great, or I love the idea of property or government work, then that's good, because you can expand on that. And all that you're trying to do throughout this process is work out where you want to be working, what type of area you may be interested in. And I think that's really helpful.
I agree. And as a really nice way to segue into our interview with Kate and James.
It is.
I think if people are interested in an area, what a great segue question if you're networking at Maddocks is to go, hey, I heard your interview on the Maddocks on the Mic podcast and would love to know more about the government practice. And for those that are interested in the government practice, we are about to segue into our interview with Kate and James, and I really hope you get a lot out of it, because we certainly did, and it's a very, very popular and successful practice group, albeit different teams.
And 2 fantastic partners. So
with no further ado,
let's jump into it. Welcome to the podcast, Kate Oliver and James Smart.
Thanks, Sophie. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Sophie. Thanks, Sam.
We're very, very excited to sit down with you both today, because something that Maddocks is renowned for is the firm's work within the public sector areas. And the team has won countless awards and is considered one of the best in the country for the type of work that you both do. Kate, can we start with you, and can you perhaps tell us a little bit about your practice area and the areas of government that you service, and as well, if you can touch on how you came to be a partner here at Maddocks?
Sure. So it's possibly a little bit of a longer journey, but I'll try and condense it down. My primary practice area is with local government. So I advise councils for the most part and do a little bit of work in that state government space, but probably not quite as much. I sort of fell into local government a little bit, in the sense that when I finished my law degree, wasn't really sure I wanted to practice law, and I started working at a council, and I found that they do a lot of really varied and interesting work, and I really enjoyed it. And an opportunity came up to join a firm in Adelaide, which is where I was living at the time, advising councils in South Australia, and I just have never really looked back since. So the variety of work that you get with local government, the fact that they really do have sort of a finger in every pie, and I really enjoy the fact that they are really a very direct interface with the community, and so you get, to work very closely in terms of good outcomes for the community. And the people in local government are great, and the relationships are really good and really fun. So I love that work and that space that I'm in. In terms of how I came to find myself to be a partner, I suppose that you start in a law firm and you look at the people who are ahead of you, and you do want to strive to achieve what they have achieved and to become a leader, not only in your practice area, but also in the firm that you work in. And I was lucky enough to have really good supports around me here at Maddocks in terms of my professional development over the 5 or so years after my shift from Adelaide to Melbourne and from my old firm to Maddocks, to help me really develop my practice, develop my skills. And I was then lucky enough for the partners to say, yes, we want you to come on board as a partner. And now I find myself somehow the practice team leader as well here in the government advisory team in public law, which is also really fun, looking after the people in the team and making sure they're getting a good experience as well.
Wow, an incredible journey. And we're going to dive into some of the specifics of the work your team does. But James, before I pass over to you, Kate, do you miss Adelaide, or are we happy with Melbourne now?
I don't want to pull like a James Sicily talking about Hobart here, but no, look, I love living in Melbourne. I've been here now for 11 years, unbelievably. So it is definitely home. It's always good to get back to Adelaide and see what's been happening there. A little bit does happen from time to time, and there have been developments in the time I've been gone. But I think that my experience also is that local government in Victoria is quite different, is a lot more political, and there's a lot more happening in terms of the projects and the services that councils are delivering. So I get to deal with some really interesting and exciting matters with my council clients here that maybe wouldn't be quite the same scale if I was still in Adelaide and practicing there.
We're very, very happy to have you here. Now, James, your practice sits within the commercial group, but like Kate's team, has a focus on government clients. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey to Maddocks and what distinguishes your practice team from the government advisory team?
Yeah. How long have I got? 45 minutes to it myself? I've been here a really long time, and I won't tell you how long, because I think a lot of people will be appalled, but it certainly was last century I started here. How's that? I started off actually quite a lot of litigation work, but also starting to work with some government bodies in the emergency services space, doing a bit of sort of commercial contract work, which I really loved. I really started focusing on that and sort of expanding that sort of practice because it's really interesting. And again, we'll come back to why that's interesting in a minute. About 10 years ago, I was actually in the public law team, where primarily state government clients. And we also had a team in our commercial group doing government work. And we couldn't work out if we were government lawyers doing commercial work or commercial lawyers doing government work. In the end, it probably didn't really matter. So the decision was for me to move to the commercial group and join up with the commercial government team, which was fantastic. We now have a really strong team. It's about 20 people. It's great. It's been really good working together because we really had the same areas of work. It's helping government carry out its commercial activities. And in my case, it's almost entirely state government, but we also do a bit of Commonwealth work in the team, commercial work for particularly Department of Health and Defence, and a bit of local government and a not-for-profit, which I'm going to talk about in a sec. But I guess what we do is we have that expertise about how to advise government in its commercial projects. And when government's running a big project, there's lots of moving parts and lots of issues to understand. And that's, I guess, the expertise the team has. Like Kate, I'm the team leader, so I get through some of the fun stuff as team leader, and then some of the other stuff. It's always interesting. It's good fun leading the team, and it's good fun, sort of helping drive the team's, business planning and helping them expand and helping the junior lawyers grow up through the team. I really love that sort of part of the job.
Yeah, great. Thanks, James. It's very interesting how the two teams operate, in the sense that they're both servicing government clients, but operate in different ways versus the front end versus the advisory work. You touched on it a little bit, James, but would you mind going into a little bit more detail in terms of the work that you do for the not-for-profit space?
Yes, of course. So clients like Melbourne City Mission, the old YMCA, Scope. We wanted to have a team that reflected the skills that we have across the team. And really those skills are working with clients where there's a budget, money's important, but it's not the driving factor for the project. And it's the same with not-for-profits. Yes, they need to make money because otherwise they'll go out of business. But the reason why they exist is to provide something to the community. And I guess that's the thread that weaves us all together across the team. They're not there just to make money. Obviously, they have to run like a business and to survive, but that's not their driving factor. That's the sort of skill we have in the team to really understand how to advise clients in that sort of area.
Yeah, it's a very complex area with lots of moving parts. Kate, you touched on earlier, government has a lot of fingers in different pies and lots of different types of work, whether it's infrastructure, healthcare, or over the last couple of years, particularly with COVID, There have been a lot of interesting work that Maddocks has done. And I don't know if you can talk about all of it. If you could maybe just pinpoint one or two really interesting pieces of work that you've done in the last couple of years?
Yeah, sure. So there were a couple of things, as you've mentioned, councils had a lot of work to do during COVID. It threw up a lot of challenges for councils in particular because of the breadth of services that they were delivering. One of the other things that was underway in the lead up to COVID that I'll mention first, because I think this is a big project that local government managed to deliver on, and it's really important in a broader context, is the Victorian Energy Collaboration, which was a project that was, I think, led and largely sponsored by Darebin City Council, but which had a view of undertaking a collaborative procurement process to procure renewable energy with a view to a group of councils getting together, using that purchasing power in the market to get a really good deal, but to shift all of their electricity needs away from the less environmentally friendly providers and moving it into renewable energy. So Darebin approached me to help them with that process. I think in the end they had, I don't know how many consultants working on the project. I helped them initially by preparing a sort of initial issues paper, which basically set out, here are the sorts of things you need to think about based on your procurement obligations, your obligations to the community, the potential for there to be competition implications. So there were all of these sorts of issues that we put together. And then they asked me to work with them to put together the collaborative procurement documentation, which was really the framework for the relationship that would exist between the councils which signed up to that procurement process. In the end, the project signed up 51 out of 79 councils in Victoria, which ended up, they say that it is the largest emissions reduction project that was ever undertaken by the local government sector in Australia. So it was pretty massive and unique in that sense. But they have said that by using renewable energy under all of their contracts, they're saving about 260,000 tonnes of carbon emissions from entering the atmosphere, and that's the equivalent of taking 90,000 cars off the road. So pretty huge undertaking. I remember at the time talking to the council and the people within council who were running the project and sort of saying to them, what's your critical mass? At what point, if you lose member councils along the way, at what point does this project fall over? And they said, we think if we've got sort of 14 or 15, we should be able to run it. If we can get 20, that'll be amazing. And
Wow.
they ended up with 51. Also, when you look at everything that's happened since then, they've locked themselves into these really long-term renewable energy contracts. When you look at what's happening in the energy market now, that has meant massive savings as well for their ratepayers. So that was a super exciting project, massive undertaking with a real tangible outcome. The other part of what I do, which came to the fore again yesterday, you might have seen, is that I help councils manage their procedures for council meetings. And that was important during COVID because we had to help them to set up council meeting processes and procedures in circumstances where people were at home, where previously we'd never been allowed to have meetings where councillors weren't physically present. It also meant helping councils through the processes while those public health orders were in place to try and explain to people why, if they weren't vaccinated, they wouldn't be able to come into a public council meeting, that they could only watch at home online. So that was a really fraught time for councils in particular, so helping them through that process. And then more recently, as we are now running public in-person council meetings again, there are lots of issues that are giving rise to protests around not just Victoria, but really internationally as well. So we've got groups that are protesting 15-minute cities that are sort of taking their lead from a particularly large UK movement. And just last night at a council meeting at Monash, and this has been in the news, so I'm not speaking out of turn, they had 100-odd protesters show up to their council meeting because the council is running a drag story time at one of its libraries on the 19th of May. And so I spent much of yesterday on the phone to people at council trying to help them to strategise to make sure that they could run this meeting safely and without any risk to councillors or other people in attendance at the meeting. So that's that's becoming a bigger part of what I do, which is unfortunate in some ways in terms of the reflection, I suppose, on the risks that government is facing at all three levels of government, but also really kind of rewarding work. You know, when I came in this morning and saw that they'd stood fast and they'd run their meeting and they had remained open to the public throughout. That was sort of a proud moment when you're looking at one of your council clients and the fact that they've stood up in the face of those sorts of challenges, and that you've been able to give them a little bit of a hand in doing so.
It's such interesting work, and I think as a junior, it's a really exciting part of working here at Maddocks and listening to, you know, partners and colleagues across the firm talk about the type of work that they're working on currently. And I remember listening to you speak about the Victorian Energy collaboration last year, Kate, and just thought that it's such an interesting matter and such cool work to be a part of. So it's no wonder that it's a massive draw card and a very popular team with clerks and grads. Before I go on with the next question, James, I might throw that question back to you as well and see if you can maybe tell us a little bit about the favourite or a highlight for you over the last few years.
I would love to, Sophie. In fact, I was going to be greedy like Kate and pick two, so I'm glad Kate went first. I thought this yesterday. I was thinking I want to pick two interesting matters, and the two I'm going to talk about are both very big projects, big budgets, high risk projects, which means lots of things. It means high level of scrutiny. It means reputational risks for the state if things go wrong. So the first one is a project that's been running for probably nearly 3 years and still taking up my time, including as recently as about an hour ago, a bit like Kate, which is the work I'm doing for Solar Victoria, which is part of the Department of Environment, Energy and Climate Action. Sorry, I sounded vague then because it just changed its name. It's a really big, it's like a $1.3 billion project. It involves rolling out solar panels, solar hot water systems and split systems to low income households. And there's various programs that are run. But essentially, we've done all the sort of commercial work on that project. So we drafted terms and conditions for the project. We've done advice on implementing those and advice on sort of key going to market documents like the nose to market and code of conduct, those sorts of things. We've done lots of advice around legislative responsibilities, governance, compliance, advice around competition law issues, particularly around ensuring consumer protection. We've seen a lot of similar projects where rebates are paid direct to suppliers on behalf of consumers where things can go wrong. And also things around permitted sales techniques, lots of advice around that to make certain things done appropriately. I guess it's interesting because it's a really big outsourcing program. It's really important the state gets value for money, but also that you know consumers are protected and aren't sort of don't have the wrong thing done by them, because a lot of the consumers are maybe not English as their first language. There's a lot of issues to protect people, and also make certain that there's rebates are paid appropriately, because there's a lot of money in the program, a lot of claims for rebates, and the state and Solar Victoria has a very strong and robust system for determining if rebates should be paid, and then managing what happens if they determine they shouldn't be. So lots of advice around, showing suppliers procedural fairness. If they decide not to pay a claim, what does that mean? What do we have to ask them to demonstrate? How do we manage it? So it's a really interesting project. It's a great example of government outsourcing a key function and just needing some support through the process, and it keeps rolling along, which is great. It's been a really successful project, and so far it's gone incredibly well. So it's been fun to be involved in it, and will be in the future. The other one we'll talk about was an integration of two water corporations. So City West Water and Western Water became Greater Western Water. Again, it was a really interesting project, very big project. We basically assisted with all the legal work on that project, from looking at advising on the integration process under the Water Act, advising on ministerial determinations, working out what documents were needed internally within the department and the organisation to give effect to the integration. We had to advise on the transfer of around 700 contracts and how to manage that. We had ministerial submissions. We drafted new delegations for the new organisation, new policies, and then also I sort of coordinate as part of the project employment advice, tax advice, construction advice. So it was really the full government team at Maddocks were really working on the project, which was great. It was something like 600 employees, 580,000 customers, a lot of people involved. And the interesting part of it was it was a bit like a due diligence in a commercial sense where you're buying a business. But the one difference was this had to happen on a particular day, and it wasn't about saying, like you would in the commercial world, you'd say, well, look, let's have a look at the risks and let's see what the costs are. Do you want to proceed with this purchase? In this case, it was happening. It was already happening. And so our job was really to say, what are the key risks and how are we going to manage them to make certain that things can happen on the nominated date? So it was really interesting. It got a bit hairy at the end where things all sort of caught up with us. The best laid plans kind of changed a little, but we got everything done and everything went through on the date. And again, it's a really good success. It's been a big project, and for the clients, but it's still a 2-year integration project. It's a really big project, but working on the legal side of integration was great fun. So they're the sort of things we enjoy working on, those really big, interesting commercial projects where you're doing something really quite exciting and quite topical. And, if you like things in the media, it's a good place to be in both Kate's team or mine, because things are often very much talked about or written about.
Yeah, I would say that, having things in the media can sometimes be a bit of a double-edged sword, can't it?
And a lot of things Kate and I can't talk about. Kate sort of alluded to it. A lot of things we can't talk about. And people often say in a marketing team, oh, you should, write about that particular project work. And I'm like, I can't.
No.
We can't talk about this. So we a lot of things we can't talk about. There's a lot of things we can, though, which is good. And look, there is a lot of scrutiny on government, and there should be, because it's our money. It's very much, I always say private sector companies have a lot of scrutiny. Of course they do. They have shareholders, but government almost has more, because it's all our money, and there's so much other scrutiny from IBAC to Ombudsman, Auditor General. There's a lot of really interesting things that happen behind the scenes in government. It's quite a complex environment to advise in, not just because of all legislation and policies and things, but also because of this level of scrutiny. And the other one's the media. The media love talking about government, and they should. And every so often, Kate and my work gets scrutinised. We Auditor Generals tend to look at big contracts and say, is the government getting value for money? That's a whole separate podcast, really, what that means. But it's important we've at least protected our clients as best we can from a legal position. And if a project isn't a success, then as long as we've done the legals and that legals are okay, that's our job. And sometimes things just aren't a success for various reasons, particularly IT projects. But our job is to set up the structure where there are the levers that government can pull if they need to, and they have all the tools at their fingertips, and then hopefully that gives them the structure they can make the project work successfully.
James, the government plays a big role in all teams in Maddocks, and you play a very important role as a sector leader in that. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that, about your role, but also the crossover with government in different teams? I know, for example, I'm a construction lawyer, and we do a lot of work with government clients, local councils.
Yeah. It's a great sector to be the sector leader of, because there's so much engagement, like you just said, Sam, across the firm, from property to construction to employment. In the case of the Greater Western Water, we had tax advice from tax lawyers who understand government as well. So it's such a big part of what the firm does. I haven't mentioned disputes. I'm missing important people. And this is bad because it's a podcast, and someone's going to say, why didn't you mention me? But it's all three sort of layers of government is a huge part of the firm's practice, which is very unusual really for a large private firm. But I think it's great. And one of the things I've really enjoyed moving into the commercial group is just being sort of surrounded in a commercial environment. Giving commercial advice is really helpful, because even though government's not commercial in a private sector sense, it still has to be commercial. It still has to operate commercially. So I've enjoyed that. I've enjoyed the sector, and it's been great to have so much interesting work around. Nice to be dragged. I get dragged in on things myself into other projects because someone's doing some big project and needs a bit of commercial advice or regulatory advice or something. So it's great. It's great fun. I mean, I always think the state government does all the the big stuff like health, education, police, emergency services, transport, all those big things that affect us day to day, like the councils. It's stuff that we are literally impacted by every day. We get public transport, kids go to school, we go to hospital, all those things that we deal with all the time are state government issues. And it's great being involved in a sector where you get to work on those sorts of matters in those really interesting areas. Gets me out of bed in the morning.
We love that. It is such an interesting sector, and the government sector here at Maddocks definitely gets a lot of attention, like I said before, from our grads and our clerks. And I know both Sam and I, from attending various events here at the firm and also going out to unis, it is probably one of the most popular questions that we get asked, that and what development does, recurring questions. So we get a lot of interest about the government sector and the different teams here at Maddocks. So it's going to be very insightful for our listeners to sort of hear that distinction and get a bit more of an insight into your practice groups. I was wondering if you had any advice for junior lawyers who are interested in getting involved in government sector work or interested in pursuing a career.
I'm not quite sure how to answer the question. I think a general interest in government is obviously important. Pay attention when you're at uni to things like constitutional law, administrative law, those kinds of topics, which will really stand you in good stead if you're heading into a government space. The other thing I'd suggest is becoming familiar with the workings of government to the extent that you can. So think about the way that legislation is made, think about the different government departments that exist and their respective responsibilities. If you're interested in pursuing local government, I would recommend, and even if you're not actually, it can be quite entertaining from time to time, watching council meetings, which is really easy to do now because all of that is online as well. So you can just sort of Google it, get a feel for that so that you're not coming in completely cold. You don't have to be an expert, but it is, I think, very helpful to have an understanding of that. The other thing, we won't always be on what might be perceived to be the right side. So we will always be working with our clients to get the best outcome for the community. But sometimes the best outcome for the whole community means that it's not necessarily the best outcome for a few. And sometimes I think it can be difficult to reconcile that. I think one of the spaces in the public law team, in my government advisory team that I'm not directly involved with, but that we do work very heavily in, is in that NDIS space and acting for the National Disability Insurance Agency, representing it in applications for review of, refusals of supports. And that can be sometimes really difficult work, and it can sometimes feel like you are, I guess, preventing people from accessing supports. The flip side of that, of course, is that, and as has again been in the news, is that we are also assisting the agency to protect its very finite resources from people who might have bad intentions in connection with it and are in fact, in a lot of cases, acting fraudulently. But sometimes it can be difficult to reconcile that personal with the bigger picture, which I think can sometimes be a little bit of a challenge. Sorry, I've gone way off tangent there.
No, it's good. It's very helpful.
Yeah, it's interesting what Kate said. If you're interested in it, then have a look at what the firm's doing. Have a look at, the government loves issuing, state government loves issuing press releases constantly. There's lots of media about the government. And I guess I'd say that, you don't have to just want to work in a particular area, because as we said before, there's so much government work done across the firm, and it could be a construction government practice or employment, or it could be any, property. We do private and public sector work in all those spaces. So there's lots of areas you can work in. Always entertaining reading in reports written by IBAC or the Victorian Auditor General's Office or the Ombudsman.
From talking to my colleagues and like the other juniors that have gone through the team, as you mentioned, it's a really high impact team. Like, you feel like you're making an impact in the community. And I think there's something that's really rewarding in working with government clients, albeit maybe difficult at times. You get the positive side. And I think that it's a very, very rewarding and satisfying feeling to be able to work on those kind of projects that really make an impact, not only in the local community, but, on the country as a whole. We could probably talk about the different projects and the different levels of government, but I'm going to make a slight detour here. I know both of you are involved in recruitment processes and have clerks and juniors come through your teams all the time. I'm going to step away from the application process a little bit on clerks applying, and I'm going to talk a little bit about networking nights and interview nights and clerks that come through your team, and even extend that to graduates. What helps them stand out, in your opinion, in those different settings? So maybe if you can take us on the journey from sort of like your networking nights, whether they're at a uni event or if they're at a firm event, an interview, and maybe a clerkship.
From my perspective, if you are coming into a networking night, it's always useful to obviously select your targets, for want of a better term, and to have some familiarity with their practice area, maybe some work that they've been engaged with, which again you can sort of find by just looking at Maddocks publications online, for example, and coming with a question that you might want to ask of them that shows that you have actually engaged with their practice area and their subject of interest. Most of us are pretty passionate about what we do, and seeing that you've taken the time to look into that and to engage with that in a meaningful way will make you really stand out. There's probably a fine line between being informed and engaged and stalking. Try and find where that line might sit. Do your best on that front. But I think that that's an important part of it. In interviews, I think having some insight into your character traits, personality traits, the way that then might dovetail with what we're looking for in terms of people who are a good fit for the firm, not just in an educational, professional sense, but also in a cultural sense. I think that we at Maddocks are very protective of our culture, and I think that's a big draw card for us. And what I notice in interviews most is when people can provide us with real life examples that aren't necessarily directly tied to their study or, other clerkships or placements that they might have done, but that show that they are well-rounded, engaged, and innovative in a sense. And I think if we can see that, then that's a really important aspect of what we might look for. If you do come into my team and you're doing work with me, I think that what I look for more often than not is for you to have a go, not be afraid to form a view, for example. So if I give you a piece of work to do, don't be afraid to form a position and form a view in respect of that particular issue or matter. You won't necessarily be right, but that's not really the point. The point is that we get to see that you've engaged critically and meaningfully with the subject matter, that you are thinking about the outcome for the client, and being able to see that you are doing that speaks volumes in terms of what your future might look like with the firm. Do not be afraid to get things wrong. I'll speak for myself. I won't speak for James here. I still get things wrong. We don't know everything. There can sometimes be a feeling that we should always be right. And so there can be a fear of putting forward a view for that reason. But honestly, you won't be judged here for getting something wrong. Really, what we want to see is how you go about that process and the conclusion that you reach, not necessarily whether that's right or wrong. So I think that's a really big part of what I look for in a clerk and a grad.
That's really good advice. And something I got given actually in my grad year is feel more comfortable to have a go and have a crack. And if you get it wrong, there's learning opportunities and it's not going to go to the client, right?
I completely agree with that, Sam. And I always say to people, if you're a clerk, you're here for 4 weeks, make an impact. Be really enthusiastic. Come in and say, hey, have you got something I can work on? What you don't want to do is keep your head down and be under the radar and not making decisions or make yourself known in case you muck something up, because that's not the way to get a job, a grad job at the end. Same in the case of the grads. Be enthusiastic. Make a call on things. Say, can I come to this meeting? Have you got any Teams meetings I can sit in on? Can I do a note about that? Do a note of the meeting and give it back to whoever you're working with. And absolutely, I completely agree with Kate. Make a call on things. Don't just do a whole long memo with no answer. Just give us the answer and say why. Love it. Networking is easy. Just be nice to me and Kate, and that's the best way through it.
You'll be fine.
I think what Kate said is right. Just work out who you want to speak to and what areas you might be interested in, and just know a little bit about what the people are doing. I sort of started this conversation with where I started at Maddocks, and it's nothing like what I'm doing now. And you don't have to get pigeonholed at the start. You might love studying tax at uni, but you might hate it in real life. There might be something. When I was at uni, I didn't sort of think even there was a practice like what we have, where you do all this work, which is basically outsourced government work. So you just don't know. So don't be too narrow in your views about where you think you might want to be. But if you do have a passion about something, absolutely go and find the right partners, or ask somebody else. When you're talking to people, say, look, I really want to talk to someone about tax, but go and find a tax partner. They'll say, go and speak to this person, this person, this person, because there's 3 of them are probably all there.
And I would just add to that, don't be worried about asking perhaps one partner or senior lawyer that you're talking to about who they might speak to about another area that you are interested in. So if you're speaking to James about the not-for-profit sector, feel free to say to James, actually, do you know what? I've also got this very weird interest in tax. And James will say, well, here, this is who you need to talk to, and we'll make those introductions. Use that opportunity to talk to different people and get as much of a feel as you can.
It's really helpful advice. I'm sure our listeners will get a lot out of that. So thank you both for sitting down with us today. We really appreciate hearing a little bit more about the work that you do here at Maddocks, and we've loved chatting with you, and we're sure that our listeners will love listening to it as well. So thank you both for your time.
Thanks,
Sophie and Sam. Yeah, good job. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for tuning in to the Day 1 series brought to you by Maddocks on the Mic. If you liked today's episode, make sure to subscribe to wherever you listen so you don't miss an episode of the show. For more information on any of the topics discussed in this episode, visit our website, maddocks.com.au.
This podcast is for reference purposes only. It does not constitute legal advice and should not be relied on as such. You should always obtain legal advice about your specific circumstances.